Luce's enemies and antagonists in the Owl House are not altogether dissimilar from herself. Now, that might seem a bit strange to say at first. Someone like Balos or someone like the Collector seem entirely different from Luce. And to a certain extent, of course, they are. Luce is not megalomaniacal. She does not have the Collector's level of capricious, uncaring arrogance. This complete insensitivity to the well-being of those around her. Nor does she have Baelos's ambition and feverish, frenzied passion to shape the world to his will, even if that means eradicating all the witches. For Baelos, that is the only way to make a clean and purified world. Luce is not like that. But there nonetheless are significant similarities between her and these antagonists. I have discussed her similarities to both characters in previous videos, but to state it bluntly and succinctly, she is like Baelos in that she came to this world from the human world and was a bit of an outsider, a bit uncertain about the future, a bit anxious from all that we saw of Baelos, and certainly from all that we know about Luce, and yet Baelos responds to that outsider status in the Boiling Isles by viewing himself as this majestic conqueror, as this sage who is tasked with the mission of purifying and redeeming this wretched and degraded world by destroying the witch population. Luce, perhaps not surprisingly, does not react like that. But importantly, the way she reacts is not just not like Baelos, it is exactly the opposite. She tries to incorporate herself into this world. She initially views it in a bit of an idealistic light, but over time she grows to appreciate the world as it is, not as she might want it to be, not as this idealized picture of what she desires. And she forms close connections in this world, specifically because she is willing to listen to the desires and thoughts of those around her. And she is willing to change for the better. She is willing to interrogate what she believes in the light provided by what she learns throughout her journeys. And she is like the Collector in perhaps a little subtler of a way. The Collector is not a maniac in the Baelos-like sense. He does not have the desire to control, to conquer, to master. He has no desire to purge the world of all witches. He's not a fanatic like that. But like Baelos, what he does have is a truly monstrous level of self-absorption. One could say this is justified because the Collector is a child, or at least childlike. And to a certain extent that's true, but what is important that the show emphasizes is that the Collector's behavior is fundamentally unhealthy and selfish. It's arrogant, it's self-regarding, it's completely neglecting the desires and wishes of those outside himself, and just wanting that level of control, wanting that level of wish fulfillment, that desire to be whatever the caprice, the whim that overtakes him says that he should want to be. It's not about deliberate, close, nuanced thinking. It's not about selflessness. It's not about a greater sense of what's beneficial to the world. It's simply a mindset that views indulging in superficial, transient pleasures as being the highest good, even if that means causing suffering to others. This point of view is a little closer to Luce. She was never that bad, but the collector does nonetheless function as a dark mirror of the person that she was at the start of the show. Jung talks about the necessity of plunging into the darkness, plunging into uncertainty in order to create distance from an initial conception of the self that is narrow, that is routine and dogmatic. Merely through the repetition of habit and custom, without thinking or reflecting or critiquing it, one's perception necessarily becomes narrow and superficial and cut off both from one's own deeper, latent perceptions of the world and one's perception of oneself. There is a chasm created between the self and the unconscious, and, as importantly, between the self and others. The Jungian journey, the Nightsea journey, as Jung puts it, is not just what we have kind of domesticized into the hero's journey archetype. It's something a lot rawer, a lot deeper, a lot more unsettling. It is not simply about confronting challenges and difficulties. It is about fundamentally turning inward. It is about viewing the self, one's self-image, not as fixed or as stable, but as fundamentally incomplete, fundamentally inadequate at understanding the vastness of the world. And so the Jungian journey requires the hero or heroine to take this plunge into the darkness, this plunge into all that is uneasy and uncertain, all that the protagonist does not think they are, does not want to be. And through that confrontation, through that examination of this supposedly not self, this self the protagonist understands that their little isolated self is not really so different from this not self. They gain this greater sense of understanding and appreciation. They escape their narrow, incomplete, routine, mechanistic perspective, this narrow, insular worldview and viewpoint, and ascend into a more broad and complete understanding. It is about fundamentally looking into the darkness within the self, being forced to look into that darkness, forced to look into the parts of oneself and the parts of the world, and these two are inevitably connected. The self cannot be disconnected from the world. That is a key part of this kind of thinking. This look inward reveals that what is conceived of as the self is not really that different from what is considered other, or what is considered not the self, what is considered the feared, what one is anxious about, what one does not want to be. It is a fundamental forced broadening of perspective that knits together and interweaves these apparent opposites. What one believes one is, what one operates in ordinary circumstances under the assumption that one is, and everything else that one believes they aren't. Everything in the world outside and everything in their own unconscious that they're not even aware of. The link between the self and the not self is revealed to be very close. The two are intimately interconnected. One cannot section off a few characteristics that one wants to be associated with, that one thinks they should aspire to be, and say, that's who I am, completely, 100%. Looking into these shadows, looking into this darkness, looking into what one believes one is not, and what one fears is necessary to arrive at this broader understanding. And that is what Luce does. That is why she needs to confront characters like Baelos and the Collector. They are her shadows, in a sense, in the Jungian sense. These are images of what she has so much anxiety about, and so much antagonism toward, not because they are completely different, completely other, completely opposite to her, but because of the exact inverse of that, because they are close to her, because they are parts of her that she could have become, and that she was partially in the start of the show. And by confronting those parts of herself and interacting with them and fundamentally rising above them, she is able to arrive at a more broad and comprehensive conception of who she really is. Her sense of self is broadened. Yes, Luce does suffer from real bullying and real ostracization in the start of the show. She is reacting against the loss of her father and the inability to form any sense of community with those around her. Her feelings of isolation are correct, and yet they do not excuse her from not having to change, not having to grow. She ultimately does undergo the same level of transformation that her mom knows that she kind of needs, even if the way that those around Luce, who don't care about Luce, want Luce to go about it is a bit dogmatic and a bit utilitarian. Luce does need to grow. She does need to think more about others. And yet she needs to do that without losing her values and her interests, and she manages to do that quite brilliantly. That is what the show is focusing on, and that is what the finale really lingers on, is not how different Luce ultimately is from Baelos and the Collector, but how ultimately there is a bigger similarity than she would like to think in her happiest moments, and she needs to confront that and ultimately rise above it. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos like this. Keep walking the Owl House. I can't wait for this show to end, as bittersweet as that ending might be. So anyway, tune in for the next analysis. We'll be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.